Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Politics Relaxed. It's great to be joined again by all our American friends. You should know them by now. We've done this enough times where you should know them. Thank you very much, all of you, for giving the time, as always. There's a lot to talk about. Trump nearly being assassinated, the RNC, uh, all of the things that have gone on with Joe Biden. We didn't even talk about the first debate yet, so we got a lot to cover. We'll start with Trump and the RNC, which has obviously been going on this week and finishes this evening with Trump to speak. So let's get straight into it. Yeah, let's get straight into it with Trump. I mean, maybe we should start with the assassination, which I was getting off a flight and just heard the news. It's, kind of something you never expect, really. So
Yeah,
let's get straight into it.
yeah. I guess especially for us, like it's really, I guess it's like history in a way for us, because like it's the first time, at least in our lifetime, that we've seen an assassination attempt on a president, or in this case, former president, that actually like struck him in the ear and was like millimeters away from actually like piercing his head. So like, especially for me, like I was just sitting around doing some work out on my phone. I just see like a bunch of blizzards, like, oh my God, someone just tried to assassinate Trump, and I was like, oh my God, what? Just it just took me like completely by surprise.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll go. I think it's just crazy the whole thing, the atmosphere, the shooter, and even how he was able to be up on that building. There were local police reports that someone, either local police or Secret Service, was supposed to be covering that rooftop, and that his presence was called in by a local police officer. So it was definitely a security breakdown, and we're really lucky that it did not kill him, because I'm not sure what sort of state our country would be in if it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note it's a 62-minute gap. It wasn't just like they called it in 3 minutes before the
Yep.
guy started shooting. It was a 62-minute gap. Called it in at 5:09 p.m. The shooter shot at 6:11 p.m. And so if you have that kind of I made a thread on Twitter where I went through all the different things that the sniper could have potentially done in the time between when he got the call and when he had to shoot the shooter. And he could have gone to Papa John's, got a nice 14-inch pizza, gone over to Great Clips, got a nice haircut, come all the way back, walked leisurely all the way up to the roof, still got in a position and had like 4 minutes to spare. So it's not like there was some kind of like, oh, we don't know what's going on. It's a complete lack of, whether you want to say it was, obviously nobody knows what's going on. But when you have the Secret Service openly testifying to Congress that, yeah, we had an hour and we saw this guy on the roof. He was just, standing there and we chose not to do anything. That's just, I mean, whether or not you want to shoot him before he gets to Trump is besides the point. They had, dozens of police officers down there. And one police officer actually did go up on the roof, but you can go on the roof, you can arrest him. You don't have to shoot him. I mean, there's plenty of other alternatives to just, taking out the target. You can say, oh, we don't fire first. But I mean, there definitely was plenty of window to avoid that situation.
And let's move on. I mean, the other big news this week has been the VP pick that we finally got. So JD Vance will obviously be the Republican vice presidential nomination. I wonder what you guys think of that.
Uh, I, he's the pick. Not much we can do about it. I would have liked to have seen somebody more unifying, somebody more qualified, perhaps. JD Vance doesn't really have much of a record aside from being an author and then going on to spend 4 years trashing Trump before he turned around on a dime in 2020 and started to run for Senate. And I'll add, in 2020, he was one of the biggest proponents in America of not accepting the election results, said he wouldn't have done what Pence did in Congress. So I'm not a huge fan of him. I would have loved to have seen Glenn Youngkin be the pick personally. He actually had a pretty surprising rise in betting odds in the last few minutes before they announced Vance. And I had a little bit of hope there for a minute. I think if Trump had picked Youngkin, the race would be over today. We wouldn't even be talking about it. There would be no speculation of Biden dropping out. I think what Vance being picked essentially opened the door for Biden to drop out and put in a more qualified candidate. There's just so much that the Democrats can use, so much that they will use, that they already have used, He called him a never Trumper, said he might be America's Hitler. That's not what you want to have in a vice presidential pick. And half the country does think that way, but if Vance is trying to play for the other side, it's just not a good look.
In a way, it's very like un-Trump to pick somebody who's been so scathing of him. But in another way, it's very Trump to pick somebody who's a big Trump supporter, a guy that is not gonna question Trump. He's on Trump's side. He's on the same part of the Republican Party than Trump is. And this is like a confident pick. I mean, it's a pick that you wouldn't expect if Trump was really, really worried that he's going to lose this. So it shows some confidence. And it's also, I know it's interesting that he's the guy that he's picked to be the kind of the next Donald Trump, because if Trump were to win the election, then the question is who's going to be the next Republican nominee. And then this gives Vance a pretty good chance of being that person.
Yeah. Well, and I'll add that in 2016, pretty much everyone was a never Trumper. Pence endorsed Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz said crazy things about Trump. The senator from South Carolina, his name is escaping me, not Tim
Lindsey
Scott,
Graham.
the other one. Yeah. He did horrible things. Well, he said negative things about Trump at the time. So in 2016, pretty much everyone was a never Trumper. But I'm not loving the Vance pick, mostly because I don't really understand it. He's not, he doesn't really bring in any group. Trump already has sort of the Midwestern blue collar workers. He already has them on lock. I think, Youngkin would have made more sense, but I don't think it really affects the election much. I think it's more of just a neutral sort of pick. Maybe it gives the Biden team a little more breathing room. And it maybe opens up some hope that another candidate not named Joe Biden could, do some good for Democrats. But here's something, and I'm sure we'll talk about the Democrats later, but here's something that we have to remember. If the Democrats do an open convention or switch their candidate, that leaves the door open for a lot of chaos. It leaves the door open for a lot of negative press on the Democrats, and it reduces the amount of time they have to raise money and organize for that candidate. So they've really put themselves in a hole.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing too. Like when I first saw that JD Vance was the guy who was replacing Trump, my first reaction was like, that seems like the last person or like one of the last people that he would pick. But at the same time, looking into it, Trump feels like kind of like what Felix was saying, that he's so confident that he's going to win this election that it feels like JD Vance is kind of the guy he's picking to get the job done. Like he'll do the job well, someone who will endorse him, but not necessarily take on that position. Like I know a couple of people were like, "Oh, why don't we see like Vivek Ramaswamy or a couple of those other people?" I'm just like, that seems like very far fetched for them to take on vice president like that. And I feel like JD Vance is one of those guys that will get the job done in a way that doesn't like overshadow Trump, and that Trump will just use him as someone to fill that position. That was kind of
I will say from a strategic standpoint, it like you bring up Vivek. Vivek is actually a huge key in all this because JD Vance, accepting the vice presidential nomination opens up an open Senate seat in Ohio. And so what that's going to do is it's going to expose another liability for Trump. The Republicans basically had the Senate on lock, right? And so now obviously DeWine's going to get to appoint someone to serve out the rest of the term, but eventually that's going to be a liability, and you're going to probably have Vivek Ramaswamy as one of the, if not the front runner for that seat. And, in a state where who knows how he's going to perform, especially against a candidate like Tim Ryan. With the Senate numbers we're seeing, I would not be surprised. Sherrod Brown is running ahead of Bernie Moreno, who's basically Trump 2.0 by 5 points in Ohio. I really think the only reason that Trump isn't losing in Ohio is because Joe Biden is on the other side. So it really is a liability. And from a strategic standpoint, I don't think Trump would do it unless he was extremely, extremely confident, that JD Vance is going to be the one that takes on this torch that, becomes president or whatever, the nominee in 2028, but also, confident in Ohio continuing to turn red, because if it doesn't, that's a Senate seat that you've just given up for free.
All right, let's move on to the Democrats. It's been a difficult few weeks, to say the least, for the Democrats, especially after Biden's debate performance and then everything that's followed on from that. I mean, surely now it's time for him to go, isn't it?
I think most definitely. And I'm not just saying that just because of age. I mean, you look at his performance in the debate, like they were asking him questions and he just kind of circled around it, muttered, and didn't really give much of an answer. And I just feel like at this point, especially just given how much of a following Trump has, especially following post, especially with the last couple months with his. I remember last time we did this episode, I was a little bit torn because it was so early in the election process that I just wasn't sure which side was going to take which. But now that we flash forward to now, I just don't see like what does Biden have? What does he have left for his next term that he's going to share, especially with one his age and then two just his campaign. Like what's he campaigning to do
Exactly.
besides Trump?
I mean, it's not. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the campaign has been completely, like, terribly run. You know, I remember talking about when we were talking about it a few months ago. It was like, well, they need to focus on things like abortion and these issues that are actually going to resonate with voters. And what have they even done? They've just kind of sat there and let Trump
Yeah.
do whatever he wanted. And now Trump has completely captured the media and completely captured the conversation. And Biden's completely out of it. I mean, I said that Biden was going to win. I couldn't have predicted that Trump would be shot at and Biden wasn't going to be able to speak for over an hour and a half on live television, which has kind of killed the campaign now. And now we're in a position where I just cannot see how Biden can go forward. I desperately do not want Trump to win. I'm really concerned about what a Trump presidency would look like for America and for the rest of the world. And I think it would be truly, truly dangerous. But if Biden sits there and doesn't resign and doesn't say, right, this is done, I can't do this anymore, then they are literally letting Trump win. And if they let Trump win, I don't think he can be forgiven for that. I feel kind of sorry for him because he's waited a long time to be president, but he can't continue. There's no world in which he can continue.
Yeah.
I think that brings up an interesting point that you saw right after the debate, is that the Biden campaign just has a messaging problem because their main message for the last, 3 years and even in 2020 was that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Donald Trump cannot be let in or he will turn, along with Project 2025 and all of his election stuff from the past, he will turn America into an authoritarian dictatorship. And what they've done is they've taken the clips, the falsely edited clips like the bloodbath clip from Michigan, or like the dictator on day one clip, which I don't think they're great rhetoric, but they're clearly not what they're saying. And they've put this false dichotomy together where it's Donald Trump as a dictator or democracy. And so when you have this dichotomy and then you say, oh, we're going to have these two candidates, but this candidate is actually like a literal vegetable and we're just going to let him stay in the race. We don't care. Like he's, if he doesn't win and then Biden goes on an interview and says, you know what, as long as I did the goodest job I can do, everything will be fine. It's not, if your messaging is right, then you need to get out of the race. And if not, nobody's going to take you seriously. They're all going to vote for Trump. And the other thing I will add is just from a general campaign messaging standpoint, this has been the worst and like the most terribly run campaign I've ever seen in my lifetime. The Biden campaign has not made any, I mean, they're starting to now with, the SCOTUS reform and all of this stuff that they're pushing out at the last minute to gain support. But they didn't do any specific policy, like realistic policy goals for their second term. Biden said he was going to reinstate Roe v. Wade. That's not happening. Biden said that he was going to finish the job. What does that mean? Their slogan is finish the job. It doesn't have any meaning tied to it. Start when you're trying to win these people over. And that's what Donald Trump has done. Donald Trump has taken advantage of all these celebrities, even Amber Rose. You look at the RNC convention, Donald Trump brought someone who is a cultural, not really a well-loved icon, but she's well-known. And you put her on the RNC stage and say, yeah, Donald Trump is a cool guy. She's not of a typical demographic for the Republican Party. And that just starts to win people over. And the Democrat Party just is terrible at messaging. They're just terrible. Like, they don't know how to do their job.
Yeah, Sam, I will build off of what you just said. It's just like on the flip side, you have the Democratic Party. You have George Clooney, someone who is very much a supporter of Biden to the last election. And in this election, he comes on to the public eye and he's just like, Biden, you need to step down. Like, what are you don't have much left to give. And even like his whole campaign, like I can see, even though I don't fully agree with Trump's campaign, it's just like, what is Biden's campaign? Like, if he's reelected, what will he do for the country? And he just hasn't answered that. Besides, Trump's bad. And if we don't vote for him, then it's democracy and everything's fine. And it's just like,
Right.
oh, that's
Well,
not necessarily.
yeah, and let me add, this narrative of Trump's going to end democracy or Project 2025 does not, resonate to a independent voter in Wisconsin who is feeling the hit of inflation or rising gas prices. That doesn't resonate with them. And telling them that inflation is going down won't resonate with them either if inflation is still higher than when it was when Donald Trump was president. Sure, it's a little lower than it was in 2022, but you're still comparing something that's worse. It's really hard to sell someone who has, quite frankly, just not really done a good job. They can restructure the message, or someone like Kamala. I don't know if that would be effective, but it surely would be better than selling this guy who, for 4 years, has not had a lot to resonate with the average American. Sure, he may have done good things in foreign policy, and in that press conference, they raved, "Oh, he knows so much about foreign policy." Do you think the middle class voter cares about Biden's foreign policy prowess on some international relation quirk in the Balkans or something? No, they just don't. They care about who can get gas prices down, who can get inflation down, who can secure the border, who can actually, present a vision for America. And they don't even have to be conservative. But, if the Democratic Party can present someone who can, say, here's our economic agenda, here's our vision, we're trying to transform America into something for the future, that may help. I don't know if they would win, but it would help.
I think on this messaging thing, I mean, I think, to be fair, I do think the Trump is dangerous message could work when done right. I think it's been done terribly and communicated poorly. That's been the problem. But this whole Project 2025 doesn't work because it's too complicated for a voter to understand. If you start talking about Project 2025, oh, go Google it. No voter's going to go Google it. Like, no one has the time for that.
Yeah.
That's silly. But at the same time, Trump is dangerous to democracy. He is dangerous on the world stage. I mean, he will be more dangerous for people living in Europe if Trump wins. And that message could resonate if it was done right. The problem is it's just so completely off the mark at the minute. Talk about in January, in 2020, and what happened when the Trump supporters stormed the Capitol. That will at least somewhat resonate with people because they know what you're talking about. When you talk about this whole Project 2025 nonsense, no one knows what you're talking about. You have to explain it to voters, otherwise they'll have no idea. I think the one good thing is, if Biden does drop out, I think you can have a messaging reset. And if it is Kamala Harris, who I think that, it looks like the only real option, because I think it'll be too difficult to try put someone else in, even though I would like it to be somebody else because I think they'll do better. I think with Kamala Harris, you can reset the messaging and then you can go again. And that's one positive, another positive.
We always say that voters have the mind of a goldfish. They don't really remember. I don't know if really voters will care enough about January 6th because it really doesn't affect a lot of them. It may not be a positive. It's not a selling point. Doesn't justify it. But voters will always care more about things that are happening now and things that are affecting them, whether that be a war, a pandemic, a recession, bad economic times, a border crisis. These are tangible things that people can see affecting them. That affects their vote more than, well, this happened 4 years ago. That doesn't really.
Yeah, I take the point. I mean, I also think, though, Roe v. Wade, another key issue where you can say, if Trump gets back in again, this is a threat to women in this country. And that is, again, a message that will get Democratic voters and the Democratic base enthused enough to actually get people out to vote.
Yeah.
Because, again, at the end of the day, I think this election, especially in the swing states, will be about getting out to vote. Because people know about Trump, people know about Biden. They may know less if they change candidate, but they will, they certainly know about Donald Trump, and their minds are made up about Donald Trump. So ultimately on election day, it comes down to getting people out to vote and getting people knocking on doors, getting people calling people, whatever it is. And at least on the abortion issue, you're going to get people out and you're going to get people enthused enough, hopefully. But
But
Is it?
here's the thing on that like
Yeah.
we have such a bad, like, it's such a weird situation where there's all these issues that, as a conservative, I am happy with, but I know 60% of the country is not, right? And so if you have the 60% of the country that doesn't, or that wants Roe v. Wade reinstated, even though it was, the most liberal abortion law in the world, fine. You want them reinstated, that's okay. What the Democrats don't do is they don't message on it because they have a president right now who can't get any message out aside from I'm fit to be in office. And when you have a president who can't talk about anything except for being able to get through the next sentences without stumbling, being able to keep his sentences together, being able to put a complete thought together with Lester Holt on NBC News, which he absolutely did not, by the way. Nobody watched that interview because it was secondary to George Stephanopoulos. When you have a president that's trying to defend from all these allegations, you can't dictate what you want to do in a second term because people don't know if you're going to be alive for a second term. People don't know what you're going to be doing in a second term, whether you're going to be in a nursing home and Kamala Harris is going to be in the Oval Office, whether Jill Biden's going to be running the country. Nobody knows. So that takes precedence in people's mind. They want to know who's going to be having the nuclear codes, who's going to be, doing the things that actually affect them, not just these policy issues. So I think if Biden gets out of the way, there's absolutely a path for the Democrats to take those, swing voters or however you may phrase them back from Trump on those strong issues. But I also think that Donald Trump has done a great job at taking advantage of this and positioning himself in the middle. He's talked about specifically on abortion, we have to win elections. We have to be moderate on abortion. And so he's taken a 15-week, 16-week position on abortion, which absolutely is still, by most world standards, a very liberal policy. So I don't think you're going to get a lot of people that are going to say, hey, we don't like this policy enough to not vote with you. Like, for example, in Europe, the most liberal policies are generally in the teens. And, I'm sure, Felix, you can speak more on that. But like, from a standpoint of an American who, in America, up to 70% of Americans, between 65 and 70% of Americans support abortion bans after 15 weeks. Now, it conflicts with opinions on Roe because Democrats have done a great job at making Roe messaging about abortion in general. But if you have Donald Trump taking that moderate position, it's going to be very hard, even if you have a new Democratic candidate, to get those swing voters back.
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about who could be the potential replacement for Joe Biden if he does choose to step down. And I guess
if Biden steps down, for a moderate Democrat like Shapiro or like Andy Beshear to come in and take the nomination, but it's also going to be very hard because Kamala Harris is a black woman. She's an, black Asian woman, and the Democratic Party has gotten themselves into a hole where, if you have someone like that at the top of the ticket and you put them off the ticket, that's going to be very hard to explain to your base. That's going to be very hard to explain to them why they should vote for a white man from Kentucky over a black woman from California.
Exactly. Especially at this point, like Kamala Harris, even though like she's not like my top pick, but like kind of saying what you were saying, it's like she's definitely the safest pick, I would say. Like if Biden's going to drop out, that's definitely the first option I would go with. But it's just like, even if she does take over per se for the, like if Biden does drop out, the message is just still going to be the same. Kind of like what we were saying earlier. It's just like Trump's bad, and then if you reelect me, it'll be democracy. Like there's just no voice there. It's just a different person saying that. To where if you get someone like Shapiro or someone else to fulfill those shoes, they would have a different message, something different that could resonate with potentially more people. And especially you see the Democratic Party trying to, like 60-70% don't want Biden. And if Kamala Harris takes over, who served under Biden, if you get someone else in there, maybe that could appeal to more voters.
The task of getting a name of a presidential candidate to be recognized that's not Kamala Harris, because no other presidential candidate would have access to that war chest. That's the key thing. Mm-hmm. That war chest that they've raised only goes to Kamala Harris.
Yep.
So in the event that there's an Andy Beshear or a Josh Shapiro or a Gretchen Whitmer or a Gavin Newsom or a Pete Buttigieg that gets on the top of the Democratic presidential ticket, A, they're out of money.
Yeah.
The Democratic donors might unfreeze their donations, but they don't have any money right now. And B, nobody knows them. So if you have somebody, who, like to be quite frank, Donald Trump's policies do resonate with a lot of middle American voters. They do. That's why he's so popular. People hate his rhetoric, but his policies absolutely resonate with people. Joe Biden and Democrats in general have not been serious for the past 4 years about taking on the border crisis. Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, who's one of the most, literally the most moderate Democrat in the entire Congress, went on one of her social media lives a year ago and said, the border crisis is stupid. People don't lose sleep at night over it. And then 6 months later, the border crisis became an absolutely national issue because of the election, and she flip-flopped, and now she's completely on the other side of it. People don't forget that. People don't forget that Joe Biden didn't issue an executive order for 3.5 years when he could have. So when people see that, they see inflation. It's a lot more than just changing the candidate. People don't like Trump, but in era, I mean, obviously, I don't know how Britain is. Britain has so many parties. You probably don't have an allegiance to just one party. But if you're in a situation where you're picking between one of two parties, it's very hard to say, I see this party in general, because it's not just Joe Biden. It's the party in general that's driving this. When you see this party in general that's being tied to the open borders, that's being tied to inflation very, very successfully by Republicans, no matter who our top candidate is, it's very hard to change that around in 3.5 months and say, no, but look, we have this guy that's 40 years old. Just vote for him, please. Like, it just won't happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're zooming out too much. I mean, ultimately, when you take this as its simplest form, this is about 5 states, something like that. This is about thousands of voters in 5 states. And to win those thousands of voters in those 5 states, the one thing that you could do, the biggest thing that you could do, is switch Biden out for somebody else. And that I am pretty confident that alone could get the Democrats over the line. I mean, they would need to do it. They would need to have a decent campaign.
But Kamala Harris doesn't have an appeal with swing voters. So if you switch Biden out for Harris,
I'm not necessarily talking about Harris because Harris is too. The problem with Harris is she's too close to Joe Biden. And she's associated with Joe Biden. But somebody else comes in, and then I think they win the presidency. I do.
You get Josh Shapiro in there, he might. He will flip Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
But they also need to flip Michigan and Wisconsin. And if they flip Michigan and Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and Nebraska too at this point are pretty far gone. There's not really a way of bringing those back. If you get Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, Joe Biden is at 270 votes exactly. So taking aside the fact that 98 people in that situation would have the potential to single-handedly switch the election for Trump in the Electoral College, once you get past that, if all the people stay true and all the people are completely not protesting the fact that you just switched out your democratically elected nominee and
I mean, that's the minor issue.
Completely stick with Joe Biden or whoever the new nominee is, then you still have that's the thinnest possible margin. Never happened before in American history, by the way. People always are like, oh, what are all these scenarios that it could get 269 or 270, 268? Never happened before. It doesn't happen. It's literally on all the models, it's like a 0.3% chance, So if that's the situation that we're talking about, that's Joe Biden's most likely path to victory, or any Democrats at this point, is to win back the blue wall. And you're talking about those voters, those swing voters, they're either suburban moms or they're blue collar workers. If you're going to be winning back over blue collar workers, you either need to have Josh Shapiro, who's not known in the rest of the country and could hurt you in other places, or you need to have somebody like Kamala Harris, who will probably satisfy the suburban voters because she's not Donald Trump, but she won't do anything else. She might even lose blue collar voters.
Yeah. And Josh Shapiro, one, he won't have the money. Two, I mean, he's young, which is a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because all he's been is like governor for 2 years. That's kind of like, and he's been good. Even as a Republican, I'll admit he's done good things in Pennsylvania, but that's kind of like putting JD Vance as the Republican presidential pick.
And he didn't have an election either, right? He ran against Doug Mastriano. Everyone was focused on Mastriano.
That's pretty much a gimme for him. And then you're going to have to increase his name recognition with no money in the course of 3 months. That's dreaming, that's really going to be a Herculean task. So I think the Democrats are.
Yeah, either way, it's a bit of a tough situation there.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be easy, but I think if you do get rid of Biden, then it really does, in my view, it puts the Democrats right back in with a chance of winning the presidency, right back in there. I think, but at the minute, the number one thing that is holding back the Democrats is Biden, is his age, is the fact that people basically think he's an idiot that can't string a sentence together. And that is the number one thing that is holding back the campaign. You can talk about issues, you can talk about name recognition, you can talk about money, but there is one very simple thing that is the reason that the Democrats are not doing better in this campaign, and it is Joe Biden. And once you get rid of that, then it resets it. It completely resets the picture, and then you have to look at this again. And you reset the campaign, you reset the messaging, and then you're in with a really good shout, I think. I mean, I don't think you can write off the Democrats yet if they get rid of Joe Biden.
I will say it's important to note that it feels like it's such a not close race at this point, because the Democrats don't have a way of coming back. Joe Biden can't speak. So if you put someone in the top spot that can articulate, I mean, yes, we've had more Herculean feats in the past. George H.W. Bush came back from what, double-digit losing polls in the middle of June to come back and win that 1990 or 1988 election. So yeah, it definitely can't happen, but Biden is only the start of the process. I think people are imagining, especially on the Democratic side, people are imagining that you switch out the old guy and suddenly all of the things that have happened during the administration go away. All of the inflation goes away. All of the, even, all the messaging with COVID. I mean, there's been a lot of, people are still mad about that, and we're a very libertarian country. And Joe Biden took a lot stronger stance on COVID than Donald Trump did. And people didn't like that, especially in the middle, the Midwest states. So you can't just think about it from, can Kamala Harris energize more, or can any other candidate energize more voters in California? It's not a push them over the popular vote finish line thing. This is we have to target these 10,000 people, these three groups of specifically 10 to 20,000 people in each of these states, and each of them have very different needs, and each of them are right now pretty heavily towards Donald Trump.
Yeah. All right, I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you very much to all of you for giving the time, as always. I'm sure we'll be back soon. Hopefully the next time we're back, Joe Biden won't be the nominee, I'm hoping. But we'll see. Thank you to you for giving the time. Thanks to you for watching the video. Like and subscribe. We'll have a lot more coming very soon. See you in a bit.